ultra-dimensional unknowns. What do they want? Are we about to come face to face with them, whether we're ready or not? Find out from the world's leading experts in this very special edition of Raiders Live News Talk Radio.
You're listening to RNN Radio, where thinking people tune in.
This is the Raiders Live News Talk Radio Show. I am your host, of course, Thomas Horn. As always, joined in the studio by that beautiful pontificate of pony power herself, Nita, and who else but the wild man, Joe Ardis.
Hey.
And we welcome you to this special edition of Raiders Live News Talk Radio on the timely subject, official disclosure. Prepare for contact. It is our privilege this evening to spend the next hour with Dr. Chuck Missler. Dr. Missler is CEO of the nonprofit organization Koinonia House, which was founded by him and his wife, Nancy, to create, develop, and distribute materials to stimulate, encourage, and facilitate serious study of the Bible as the inerrant Word of God. As a Naval Academy graduate, former branch chief of the Department of Guided Missiles, Chuck had a remarkable 30-year executive career. He served on the board of directors of 12 public companies and was CEO of 6 of them. For 20 years, Chuck balanced his whole high-profile corporate career with his teaching commitment to a weekly Bible study at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California. Wow, that had to be a big class. After a devastating earthquake in 1992 demolished their home in Big Bear, California, Chuck and Nancy moved Koinonia House to Idaho, where it now reaches tens of thousands through its monthly newsletter, radio shows, cassette tapes, conferences. For instance, more than 8 million study tapes have been distributed in the United States and over 35 countries around the world from this ministry. So, from somewhere in Idaho, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to this special edition of Raiders Live News Talk Radio, Dr. Chuck Missler. Good evening, Chuck.
Tom, it's nice to be with you. I appreciate the opportunity. It's a great time to be with you.
Hey, well, it's absolutely our pleasure to have you as part of this special series. This series, of course, will be also broadcast live through syndication, and then as well will be made into a commercial product after the end of this week. We've got something like 20 shows set up. You are absolutely at the top of those that we were hoping to talk to. And I also want you to know that we have personally enjoyed and benefited from your ministry for many years. So I'm glad you can make it. In the next hour, we're going to be talking to your buddy Terry James, asking him what he makes out of all this extraterrestrial business, too.
Yes, Terry's a dear friend, and we're participating in his forthcoming book on this kind of thing. So it's going to be interesting to see, get some pooling of perspectives, because you've picked one of the most difficult areas to deal with, because it's so replete with hoaxes and nonsense that it's very difficult to research. And yet when you cut through the nonsense and the foolishness, you discover there's enough there that is really quite disturbing in its implications. So I don't envy your taking on this kind of a topic, especially dealing with a general, a public presentation of it, because so much of it is so technologically specialized that I'm sure it comes across pretty strange to the uninitiated. So I respect the risk that you're taking here by just opening this Pandora's box of confusion here.
Well, I know it's going to be challenging, especially to a man of my meager intellect. You know, of course, and I don't know if you've even had time. I know you're a very busy man. The Royal Society meetings started a couple of weeks ago. They had 2 or 3 days where they had these, what they call dizzying intellects, that were there. There's been a commentary that's been coming forward since through the news. It was a news story today from the Royal Astronomer, Lord Martin Rees, who has the ear of the Queen, and the headline that people could Google if they wanted to is, "Aliens May Be Staring Us in the Face." Very interesting article. Have you had any time to pay any attention to this conference or any of the news coming out of it over the last couple of weeks?
No, candidly, I have not. I've enjoyed your book, Apollyon Rising, and some other things that I've been meaning to get at and digging into now, but I have to admit that I haven't really stayed current on the Royal Society meetings. No,
well, you must not have read very far into Apollyon Rising if you agreed to do this show.
No, I'm quite fascinated with the very unique perspective that you bring to that topic. So I don't want to derail what we're talking about here by going down that path, except to say that I regard that book as a must-read for any serious Christian, and so I'm getting a great deal out of it.
Well,
but it comes at a penalty, though, of having not prepared particularly on this topic in terms of the Royal Society meetings, because. But I'll be surprised if it's interesting that they're dealing with these issues, but it's not surprising as I watch them and also the Vatican and others address these topics. They're addressing it in a surprisingly direct way, which is refreshing because ever since Roswell, this whole area has been sort of an area that is confined to the kooks and the extremists and the fringe types. And it's interesting to see that there are very, very serious organizations starting to take this whole topic quite seriously, and that in itself is refreshing.
That is very refreshing. Well, let's get right to it then. Also, in addition to the Royal Society's anniversary, you have this, I think it's the 50-year anniversary of Frank Drake's famous Drake equation that kick-started the SETI program. Can you explain the Drake equation to us lay people?
Sure.
And also, what do you think about SETI?
Sure. Well, SETI, of course, is a search for extraterrestrial. CETI is actually is a term used to actually attempt a communication. But all of this seems to revolve around what sometimes is called the Green Bank formula, or more commonly the Frank Drake formula, and it basically is an attempt to estimate the number of civilizations in the galaxy that are capable of interstellar communication. And the way the Drake formula attempts to address this, it deals with 7 parameters, and the number of galaxies that would be capable of communication would be the product of these 7 numbers. For example, the first number, typically called R, is the average rate at which stars develop during the lifetime of the galaxy. So that's a number that astronomers can estimate, maybe. And then you multiply that by the fraction of those stars that have planets, and then you multiply that by the average number of planets per star that's capable of supporting life, and you multiply that by the fraction of the planets with life, and then you multiply that by the fraction of planets with intelligent life. Each one of these parameters lends itself to an estimate, obviously just a guesstimate from experts in that area, but it sort of partitions the specific segments. And anyway, you take the fraction of planets with intelligent life and you multiply that by the fraction of planets that have intelligent life capable of interstellar communication. And then you multiply that by the average lifetime of a society capable of interstellar communication. By the time you take a product of all these numbers, you have an estimate of the number of galaxies or civilizations in a galaxy capable of interstellar. Now, back in 1971, they had 84 of the top scientists that they could get their hands on assembled at the USSR, in those days, Academy of Sciences, for a conference. And that conference is published, I forget by whether MIT or Wiley Press, but anyway, the proceedings were published. It was very interesting to read the translation of that conference because, in effect, each one of these specialists dealt with each one of the 7 parameters of the famous Drake formula to come up with an estimate. And what's interesting about the discussions is whether they realized it or not, they were really arguing about the very premise of life, really. And what they actually concluded is interesting because they virtually indicated that the only evidence they have is a singular exception, which the casual term would be a miracle, in other words. The point is that the actual conference tried hard to end on an optimistic note, but the truth of the matter is, as you go through those parameters, it becomes clearer and clearer and clearer that the probability of having civilizations of a galaxy capable of interstellar turns out to be very, very pessimistic, very unlikely.